Hi guys, and welcome back to another book video. This week I want to talk about Dreams of Our Daughters, which is a collection of short personal essays written by low-income women in Singapore. And it's compiled by a local charity organization called Daughters of Tomorrow, which do really fantastic work in Singapore. I volunteered with them briefly, but to my knowledge, they have several different programs all around empowering young women and women in general in Singapore, ranging from child minding services to confidence training to bridging with careers. When I did the training for DOT, they talked a lot about the importance of flexible work arrangements, especially for women that have a lot of caregiving responsibilities and are already really stressed about how to make ends meet. A lot of times those lifestyles don't fit into the standard 8 to 5 working hours. And so when we learned about how to bridge to different job opportunities, one really important thing was finding employers that either have agreed to have more flexible working hours and are part of a program that is dedicated to that, or just inherently are more flexible work like elder care or nurseries. But anyway, my really good friend Phil gave me this, so I'm so appreciative. It's just a slim little compilation of the stories of these women's lives. It is pulled together by Zubaida Ali, and so I think she spoke to these women and worked on helping them craft their stories and put them into this edition. This came out, I think, a couple years ago. It came out in 2023, and I just really want to plug this because it aligns with something I believe in really deeply, which is hearing from the source as close as you can. I think when it comes to like any organization, like in a corporation, in a government, in a democracy, it's great to have academic analyses. It's great to have books written and to hear from charitable organizations, from representatives, but I really feel nothing replaces listening to the stories of those affected themselves, and that is what I think this represents. Obviously it's not perfect, and it's better to talk to everyone, but insofar as we can get snippets of that through books like this, I think we should all be reading them and hearing about these stories through a first-hand account. And I really just feel like that would improve a lot of things about the state of the world today. Like if we didn't just get our information from TikTok or from the newspaper even. I mean, all of those things are great, and we do need to just consume a lot of different sources. But I just think, for me, I find it particularly satisfying and meaningful to hear firsthand accounts. I think I also really experienced that in one of the first books I ever read about Singapore when I first moved here in 2018. It's called They Asked Us to Move by Kuk Ho, who is a researcher and an expert on inequality and also housing in Singapore. But that, I guess I'm just not a sociology expert or an academic. This is probably very natural for them and stuff that they read all the time. But for me, it was new because that tells the story of resettling residents of the Dakota estate into a new estate because that block was going to be torn down. And it just really provided a lot of firsthand accounts of what the concerns of the citizens are, the challenges that they faced, and something about hearing about it straight from who is being affected is just really impactful and I think important. And then of course, having it written into a book, having it written into research, then amplifies it. But I guess what I'm saying is I really believe in sociological research and interviews and firsthand accounts. That's also something that Teo Yen does in her book. This is what inequality looks like. So I recommend all three. I recommend this, I recommend They Asked Us to Move, and I recommend This Is What Inequality Looks Like. So this book is separated into 3 sections, And each section comprises short personal essays from the women that have been helped by Daughters of Tomorrow. And then there is a short foreword giving context. And I really like this structure, and I think it is super important because you need both, right? Like, it's great to hear the firsthand account, but then we also need to understand the policy barriers and the current state of play that has caused these lived experiences. There's also a foreword to this book by a pretty well-known MP, Sun Xueling. She just won her election in her GRC recently. But at the time, I think she might still have the same portfolio. We're having a reshuffle, but at the time she was Minister of State at Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Social and Family Development. So this is definitely kind of supportive and working within the context of the government system, which makes a lot of sense. I would say the Singapore government is the main stakeholder in Singapore, which is the case, I think, in a lot of countries. I'm not an expert on this, but to a much larger degree, we do have caregiving organizations, charitable organizations, social welfare organizations, but they almost always are working through the government or advocating for citizens to work through government channels or to go through government processes. I also wanted to shout out the cover. This is done by Hafi, who is a local Singaporean illustrator and artist, and I have some of her prints in my house, and one of my really good friends also has commissioned work from her, and this cover is really indicative of her style, the pink human beings, and so I think it really matches kind of the overall vibe of being hopeful and being inspired by the resilience of the women in the book. So I did want to cover a little bit the different sections because I think it's super interesting, and this is not just interesting for people who care about social issues or for women. I think this is interesting for everyone. If you live in Singapore, whether you're an expat or a Singaporean, I really do think it's important that you read this. It's so short. But the first kind of theme is on caregiving and health, and I want to just share some of the context. So actually, in most family scenarios in Singapore, the main caregiver role usually remains the responsibility of women. In single-parent households where the mother is the breadwinner, balancing caregiving with a career is nearly impossible and can be a contributing factor to being stuck in a cycle of poverty. Some of the hurdles are workplace-related, such as colleagues who do not understand why mothers need to leave work on the dot to pick up their children, or why some decline after-work invitations because of caregiving duties at home. A consequence of that for the woman is missed opportunities to get to know her coworkers better, thus perpetuating a feeling of isolation and lacking a social network. Worse, the unspoken worry, will this cost her chances of promotion in the workplace? So I think that's pretty easy to understand. Another point that I didn't really consider is this. Caregivers also bear the risk of being chronically ill after many years of caregiving, especially in their later years, as can be seen from some of the caregiver stories in the following chapters. Globally, people living in poverty experience more health problems than those who don't. When financial struggles are coupled with prolonged caregiving to others, this problem is exacerbated. DOT's data on women living in poverty in Singapore shows that caregiving and health issues are two of the biggest barriers to securing and sustaining employment for women from lower income communities. In one of the stories told to us by a caregiver, she asks, "Is this it? Is this what her life amounts to? Being a caregiver to parents and to children. A continuum of taking care of others means that she never got the chance to live her life free and independent of responsibilities. She wonders what she could have been had she not been burdened by caregiving responsibilities throughout her life. Bringing these stories together, we hope to plant the seed which might turn the tide of the shared responsibility when it comes to caregiving responsibilities." So I think that's a really important point. Like, why does that always fall to the woman? Also, when it does fall to the woman, it results in worse health outcomes. And then on top of that, I think there's this trendy term about the sandwich generation, and especially in Singapore and in a lot of Asian cultures where there is a very strong obligation to care for your parents, the sandwich generation is not only taking care of their kids, but also taking care of the elderly, which obviously is just completely exacerbated if you are already struggling with your financial conditions, and if either your children or your grandparents have any type of like medical condition, or they're not able to work, or if you don't get along with them. Like, I can't imagine. It sounds very difficult. Another thing that I did do with DOT was I took their poverty sensitization training. And as an American, it was a little bit odd to me because I think we have a real aversion to like cosplaying as poor people or anything where you're kind of just like pretending to be poor. There's like a very strong aversion to that in the US. But this poverty simulation was basically moderated or by a facilitator who took us through this PowerPoint presentation. We were to act as if not like act as if we were poor, but we were given the profile of someone similar to who DOT helps and is in a difficult financial situation. And throughout the PowerPoint presentation or throughout the simulation, we are given choices after choice. So that was one takeaway, which is like the overwhelming amount of decisions you have to make in a day as a poor person is very paralyzing. And when you have money, you really don't have to make as many decisions. Sure, we all make a lot of decisions, but a lot of decisions can just be erased by throwing money at it. So that was one. And then two, we had like different stockpiles. We had like money points, health points, family relations points, and each choice you made would deplete one of those stockpiles. And a lot of the times, and then we had like a budget, right? So the money would be drawn from our pretend budget. And a lot of times the choices are really tough. It's like, do you pay this fee immediately so you aren't penalized? Or do you wait because actually that money needs to go somewhere else? And a lot of times, I think poor people are forced to pick the quote unquote worst decision for their financial stability because they don't have the security of making a long-term choice. And that also comes across in the way that it harms like your health, as well as your career prospects, as well as your relationships. So I personally found the DOT poverty simulation workshop to be really eye-opening, and if anyone has a chance to do it, I would say try, especially if you kind of have in the back of your head that there isn't much poverty in Singapore or there isn't inequality in Singapore. I think it can open your eyes to certain things that we don't view as a big deal. But if you're coming from a more precarious situation, for example, you're divorced or you don't have access to housing or you don't have a stable working arrangement, a lot of these like small things really become big things and can result in being unhoused or basically living in a state of poverty. The second theme in this book is on housing and divorce. And this is also something that's very specific to the Singapore context. I think coming from the West, we have such a housing problem and a homelessness problem that it's hard to sometimes fully comprehend and appreciate what it means to not have your own public housing in Singapore. The issue here is really, trying to upgrade from living in a rental flat to having an HDB house. But I think what's really pertinent to this conversation is what happens when you are divorced and then you sell your HDB. You are then penalized for you have to pay a fee if you then try to enter the system again to get another house. Obviously that's set up so you don't take advantage of the system and try to flip or get too many opportunities to get an HDB. But as with anything, the broader policy might work for most of the cases that you come across, but for those on the fringe or those in domestic abuse situations or foreigners who don't have that many rights or people that come to Singapore and are fully dependent on their spouse or their husband and not fully able to navigate the system, it can be very detrimental. So in the summary, they say, families living in rental flats yearn for the day when they can move into their own purchased homes. Yet housing remains one of the most elusive and costly items for anyone to acquire. It is even more challenging for single-parent families as the cycle of informal and temporary housing solutions is a never-ending challenge as they struggle to cope. A research project by Aware showed that up to 56% of those who sought to move in with family members as a temporary housing solution experienced strained family relationships. Many single-parent families also get caught unaware by policy barriers that penalize them for previous ownership of flats, with hefty levy fees and depleted chances to reapply for a flat. Aware's research highlights the difficulties faced in situations where matrimonial homes are given up involuntarily but are subject to the same ownership debarment rules as for voluntary relinquishment, thus contributing to difficulties around securing safe and peaceful temporary home solutions. Aware is our local women's advocacy nonprofit in Singapore. Yeah, I think everyone wants a home as part of their desires and dreams, but particularly in Singapore, it is baked into the Singapore dream is to have home ownership. It is part of the social compact. It is part of what the PAP, the founding ruling party, promised to Singaporeans is access to owning a home. And so especially in this context, I think it is really baked into what a lot of people want, and a lot of people define their stability and their quality of living against. So a lot of the essays in this section were really sad to read. In general, I would say all of the essays leave you with a sense of hope, and especially for us and anyone watching this video, we're really lucky, we're very privileged, and so I think it really helps you empathize. But particularly in this section, you know, there's one lady who's now 60, and she's now eligible for the program where HDB provides studio rental flats for the elderly, but she really lived her whole life without having access to secure and stable housing. And now she's 60 and she finally can have that. And it's just crazy for me to think about, because that was her whole life she didn't have that. And I think both in terms of social status, but also just literally in terms of your financial and material conditions, having a safe and secure, stable, not temporary place to live is just a basic human right. And so hearing about how for various reasons, either because of divorce or because they were unfamiliar with how complicated the rules are around accessing HDBs, they were not able to get that, really made me more empathetic and aware to how there's still a lot of problems for those living on the fringe in terms of the public housing scheme in Singapore. And the other thing is every essay ends with the question, what is your dream? And particularly in the section on housing, every single woman said her dream was for her children to have a house, and to have a safe place, an HDB flat where they could live and not have to worry about moving from family place to relative place to temporary housing. And it's just so interesting, I guess, that every single one of these women didn't say my dream is to have my own house. Every single one of them said my dream is for my children to be able to experience what I didn't have. Okay, and then the last section is on employability. And I think in the context of Singapore, everyone really believes that you need to work, and that was kind of one of the key takeaways from Teo Yo Yen's book, This is What Inequality Looks Like, is in Singapore, the way the policy is set up, the way the government is set up, the way that trickles down to the social compact, to the culture, everyone really believes that you should not be lazy, it is a meritocracy, and you should be working. So I think that is something that undergirds the overall context of this kind of section on trying to get work and becoming employable. And this book in DOT really makes the point that one of the key obstacles is the burden of caregiving. How are you supposed to be able to work if you have to take care of kids or the elderly? The intro says, the foreword says, many families living in public rental flats cannot afford professional help, such as domestic workers, or may not be able to strike a balance between work and caregiving center hours, and so they have to bear the burden of caregiving themselves. Inadequate childcare is the largest single barrier to employment among DOT beneficiaries, affecting 35% of them in 2021. You can see in the chart from their little survey that they did. Most often the task of caregiving falls to the mother, and invariably the job, or more specifically the income from her employment, is lost. Apart from the household income being at risk, the stress and exhaustion of managing a household and caregiving takes its tolls. The stories in the following chapters explain the discrimination faced by women for being single mothers when trying to secure employment, as the general perception is that they will not be able to perform as well as those who are married. Other stories revolve around how the emotional impact of divorce and trying to get maintenance, which I think is spousal support, from ex-spouses is exhausting, making women drop out of the workforce. Difficulties in being able to match work schedules to school pickup and drop-off times and caregiving when a child is homesick are key contributing factors to being unable to sustain employment. While the Singapore government's white paper on women's development, released in 2022, addressed a series of issues that exist at the ground level for women contemplating back-to-work options or negotiating flexible working arrangements, such conversations are difficult to initiate. The power imbalance remains largely in favor of employers and HR departments, which are still rooted in conventional ideas that solely focus on performance and attendance. Yeah, I think there's like a broader conversation happening in Singapore, especially with the most recent election, which happened on May 3rd, RGE 2025, around what does inclusion look like here. And I think there is an appetite from society to be a little bit more focused on the lived experience and the variety of different lived experiences, and being open and compassionate towards that, rather than so laser focused on growth at all costs and trying to create an extremely impressive and ambitious national story, given we're surrounded by all these threats and we're such a tiny country with no natural resources. And so I'm not saying one is right and the other is wrong, but I think in general there's more of a conversation and more of a willingness to have a balance. Maybe we can acknowledge other parts of society or other parts of our history. Maybe we're now mature enough and developed enough to be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more open in how we think, and also how we develop and execute policy in Singapore. So that's a topic I'm very passionate about. I love discussing local politics. I'm obsessed with our most recent election. So hit me up if you ever want to have an offline chat about that. But in general, I really recommend picking up Dreams of Our Daughters. If you are friends with me, I'll probably gift it to you the next time I see you. I think I'll buy a few copies of this. And thank you for watching this video. And I'll see you in the next one.